Now, this is about Chris Hedges. So, for those of you who are not aware, Chris Hedges was removed from YouTube. He is a part of the crop of people that had shows on RT, and they were, RT was done, and then they also removed those shows from YouTube as well. It's him, Lee Camp, and Abby Martin. So since then, Chris Hedges has actually started a Substack, and I don't know if everyone was familiar with that or not. I'm not sure if he had one before, but I didn't remember seeing one from him before. But he is on Substack, and I've been checking out some of his articles, and there was one that he wrote recently about war propaganda and about the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And I want you to take a look at this. Now, I believe this came out yesterday. It's called The Pimps of War. So this is really interesting. And I don't know if everyone is aware of this, but Chris Hedges actually, he's been to some of these countries where we've had these conflicts. So he talks about that a little bit as well. I'm not going to read the entire article, but there are certain parts here that I do want you to pay attention to. So this is The Pimps of War. He says the same cabal of war-mongering pundits, foreign policy specialists, and government officials, year after year, debacle after debacle, smudgely dodge responsibility for the military fiascos they orchestrate. They are approaching, shifting adroitly with the political winds, moving the Republican Party to the Democratic Party and then back again. Mutating from Cold warriors to neocons to liberal interventionists. Pseudo-intellectuals, they exude a cloying Ivy League snobbery as they sell perpetual fear, perpetual war, and a racist world view, where the lesser breeds of the earth only understand violence. Now, let's talk about this part right here. Moving from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party and then back again. This is something that I want people to fully understand, and I've mentioned this a couple times before on this show and on other people's shows as well. When we talk about these differences between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they're not as different as many people think. Most of the differences come in on the social issues, right? But even today, that's a little bit questionable. That's a little bit questionable if you follow the legislation. One of the issues where the Republicans and the Democrats both seem to agree on is war. Recently, I was on a podcast by Massachusetts Peace Action. By the way, if you don't follow them on YouTube, definitely follow them. They've interviewed like Ronnie Akalik and Max Blumenthal. It's really, really good channel. But it's an organization here in Massachusetts. They're anti-war, anti-imperialist. So definitely check them out. But I said this recently on their show as well, that both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are both pro-war. Regardless of the presidents that we've had, they all support it, at least within my lifetime. I'll give you a couple of examples. Ronald Reagan supported it. Bill Clinton supported it. Barack Obama supported it. George W. Bush supported it. Trump, I think, in some ways, I have to go back and check that out. But even with Trump, even in some ways, he supported some intervention as well. And now we have Joe Biden, and Joe Biden, obviously, you see with the conflict with Ukraine and Russia, Joe Biden also supports war. Both parties are filled with warmongers. You can name out different people from even within my lifetime. Madeleine Albright, she was a warmonger. Colin Powell was a warmonger. Now, again, they may have been in two different parties, but they're both pro-war. And this is something I feel like a lot of times when people are deciding if they're going to be a Republican or a Democrat, and again, I told you both parties are trash, but this is the issue that I realized, like, with talking to people, they don't seem to realize that both parties support it. Both parties are totally fine with intervening in other conflicts in other countries. Both parties are fine with drone strikes, as we've seen under the Obama administration. We've seen it under Joe Biden. We've also seen this under W as well. Both parties are fine with it because for them, what it does is it creates this narrative that the United States is the country that is the one that's in the right. We are supposed to be the saviors. We're the good guys. You guys ever notice that? The United States government is always the good guys, supposedly. And all of the other countries that are having these conflicts, they're the ones that are the bad guys, and we have to go in and take them out. This is the narrative that they paint on mainstream media, that the politicians paint as well. And it encourages other Americans to be pro-war without even realizing that they're doing it. This leads to the destruction of civilians in those countries. It leads to sanctions of those countries. It leads to starving, homelessness, people in those countries. We can point to several examples right now: Afghanistan, Somalia, Yemen, several. The problem is that most people that I've spoken to, they're so focused on the "we are the good guys" phrase that they don't dig deeper and do their own research and see all of the other effects of war in those countries, how the civilians struggle, how they suffer, and what the United States government is actually doing to those countries. And another thing I want to add before I go back into this article as well, a lot of times this has to deal with resources and economic issues. For example, you heard Ro Khanna say this himself recently in that interview. I think I played this last week. He said recently, the goal is to cripple Russia's economy. The goal is to bring Russia's economy to its knees. Those are his words, not mine. You see, the United States is constantly looking at China. They've already made people, some Americans have bought into this propaganda and believe that, oh, Russia is a bad place. We need to hate people from Russia. They're doing the same thing with China. These are two countries that economically, they're all right. China, economic, they don't need us. We need them. We don't even make anything in this country anymore. You guys realize we don't produce. What do we make? What do we produce? That is why they're eyeing China, because they see that countries like China, they have eradicated 95% of homelessness in China. They are doing fine without us. And I reported this last year, that China's net worth has now surpassed the United States. So mark my words, they'll be going after them next. And I'm calling it. They'll be going after them next. Russia, in reference to the economy, they were doing great. They were doing fine. That is the reason why the United States government wants to take those countries out. A lot of the interventions involve resources. We were in Afghanistan. Part of the reason we were in Afghanistan was because of opium. This whole ordeal with Russia and Ukraine involves a pipeline. There's usually some type of resource or something in it for the United States to get involved. And I want to make that clear to people who are not aware, right? Who are not aware of why these things are happening. The United States wants to be number one economically. They want to be the best in the world, and they want to continue to police the world. And any country that comes up behind the United States that starts to get close to where we are economically, or is going to pass us economically, they will find a way to target them too, and they will try to brainwash all of you and everybody else who's watching on mainstream media that we need to hate those countries and hate those people, and they will smear them just like they're doing now. Let me go back into the article. So there's another part here that I wanted to point out. The Pimps of War, puppets of the Pentagon, a state within a state, and the defense contractors who lavishly fund their think tanks. Listen to this: Project for the New American Century, American Enterprise Institute, Foreign Policy Initiative, Institute for the Study of War, Atlantic Council, and Brookings Institution. Why did I want to mention these to you? Because if you're just glancing at these think tanks, for the most part, their names do not sound suspect. Project for the New American Century. Does that sound like they're involved in defense? No. American Enterprise Institute. Well, that could mean a lot of things, right? Atlantic Council and Brookings Institution. This is done on purpose, by the way. Just something that I wanted to point out. It doesn't matter how wrong they are, how absurd their theories, how many times they lie or denigrate other cultures and societies as uncivilized, or how many murderous military interventions go bad. They are immovable props. The parasitic mandarins of power that are vomited up in the dying days of any empire, including ours, leaping from one self-defeating catastrophe to the next. And that is what they do. So it's really important that people pay close attention to these think tanks. When you see these names of these think tanks come up on CNN or MSNBC, Google them and see what they actually do and who they are connected to. That's really important. This is another thing I've also told people about nonprofits as well. A lot of these nonprofits, it sounds good in theory, but when you actually research those nonprofits, you realize a lot of times they're funded by or they're connected to a CEO, a millionaire, a billionaire, and the profits aren't going to places that you think they would go to. That's important. Let's go back in. Now, this is what Chris is talking about by his experience. Just for people who are wondering, I spent 20 years as a foreign correspondent reporting on the suffering, misery, and murderous rampages these shills for war engineered and funded. So he knows this from firsthand. My first encounter with them was in Central America. Elliot Abrams, convicted of providing misleading testimony to Congress on the Iran-Contra affair and later pardoned by President George H.W. Bush so he could return to government to sell us the Iraq war. That's important for people to know. Here we go. Let's say it again. My first encounter with them was in Central America. Elliot Abrams, convicted of providing misleading testimony to Congress on the Iran-Contra affair, and then later pardoned by George H. Bush so he could return to the government to sell us the Iraq war. And I think we all know how that turned out. That's one of the examples. There's another portion I want to mention here. They and their coterie of fellow war lovers went on to push for the expansion of NATO in Central and Eastern Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall, violating an agreement not to extend NATO beyond the borders of a unified Germany and a reckless, antagonizing Russia. I also think that's something that's important for people to know too. And I'm not sure if everyone is aware of that. That was a part of the agreement after the Berlin Wall was torn down. NATO was not supposed to expand. It expanded anyway. And this led to other conflicts. This is part of the reason that leads to the conflict that we're in right now with Ukraine and Russia. Part of it, not all of it. Let's go back in. So there's another portion here. They were the authors of the policy to invade Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Libya. Robert Kagan and William Crystal with their typical cluelessness, wrote in April 2002 that the road leads to real security and peace is the road that runs through Baghdad. I have to look that up. I have to look into that. We saw how that worked out. That road led to the dissolution of Iraq, the destruction of its civilian infrastructure, including the obliteration of 18 of 20 electricity generating plants and nearly all of the water pumping and sanitation systems during a 43-day period when 90,000 tons of bombs were rained down on the country. The rise of radical jihadist groups throughout the region and failed states. The war in Iraq, along with the humiliating defeat in Afghanistan, shredded the illusion of U.S. military and global hegemony. Let's go down here. I want to show you the part about Joe Biden. The Biden administration is filled with these ignoramuses, including Joe Biden. Victoria Nuland, the wife of Robert Kagan, pay attention to this, you guys, serves as Biden's Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. Anthony Blinken is Secretary of State. Jake Sullivan is National Security Advisor. They come from this cabal of moral and intellectual trolls that includes Kimberly Kagan, the wife of Fred Kagan, who founded the Institute for the Study of War, William Crystal, Max Boot, John Podhoretz, Gary Schmidt, Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith, David Frum, and others. Many were once staunch Republicans or, like Nuland, served in Republican and Democratic administrations. Nuland was the principal deputy foreign policy advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. So what does this tell you? What does this tell you about Joe Biden and, more importantly, the two-party system? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if they're Republican or Democrat, especially when it comes down to war, because that's something that both parties agree on. So Joe Biden's administration has people in his administration that have served on the Republican side and on the Democratic side, but it doesn't matter because they are going to push pro-war agenda. I'm going to go to some of the comments in the chat. Leroy said, all they do is cover each other. Exactly. Meanwhile, they will make sure that we continue to fight and argue with each other over these culture war issues. Orange man bad. They'll make sure that we're distracted by that so that we're not paying attention to the fact that at the end of the day, both of these parties are really working together. They're both corporate. They're both pro-war. The only time they really split is on the social issues. And that's how we're divided. I'm going to go to some of these comments and I'll go back in. This is a really good article, you guys. Colorado People News said Hedges plans to make enough money on Substack, I think you mean, to restore his On Contact show. That's interesting to note. Eric O said, what happened to a pro-peace, pro-labor, and pro-social equity party? Oh, yeah, I forgot. It was sold to the lowest bidder. Yep, X said, hope Sabby clips out this Chris Hedges discussion. Yeah, I can do that. I can do that. Venus said, always follow the money. Sebastian says, let's not forget that the current head of defense is from a defense contract company. There you go. They all scratch each other's back when it comes to these types of issues. They just remain divided over the social issues. But at the end of the day, they're all about money. They're all serving corporations in Wall Street, and they're both pro-war. There's another portion I want to show you here. And Dick Cheney was horrible, by the way. God. Okay. They are united by the demand for larger and larger defense budgets and an ever-expanding military. Julian Benda called those quarters to power the self-made barbarians of the Intelligentsia? Intelligentsia. Interesting word there. But they are united by the demand for larger and larger defense budgets and an ever expanding military. And why would they be united over that? Let's think about it for a second. Under the Biden administration, they gave the military industrial complex $768 billion. Now, I showed this chart a while back. I'll have to pull it up again for you guys to show you the numbers. But this was comparing the amounts that would go towards Biden's Build Back Better plan. $768 billion to the military industrial complex. And when you went to the other categories, such as paid family leave, when you went to free community college, when you went to all the other social issues or social programs, very little money was allocated towards those. This was the plan. Very little was allocated towards those, but the military industrial complex was receiving the huge bulk load of the money. $768 billion. And here's the thing. The reason why both of them would be united over that is because of money. You have all these other defense contractors. You have Raytheon, you have Lockheed Martin, all these other companies that are getting paid for this. They make money for this. They make the weapons and everything for the military industrial complex. It's not just people who are in the armed forces. So I do want to say that to people who may not fully understand, military industrial complex doesn't just mean people who are in the armed forces. That also applies to all these defense contractors that also make the weapons for the armed forces. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So it's a lot of money that they're giving to the MIC. Now, if they were to disagree on that in a sense, well, then they would have to still put that money somewhere, right? Then they would have to give the money to the people. They would have to put more money into free college. They would have to allocate more money towards universal health care. Then they would have to serve the people. As long as they have an excuse, well, we have this conflict in this country, we have this conflict in another country. That is a way for them to defend that bloated military industrial complex budget. And as long as they have their hands in some other country's affairs, they can point to that and say, well, we needed that money because, this conflict with Ukraine and Russia. We needed that money because Afghanistan. Oh, we need that money because, China, we might have to go after them. That's why both of them would be united. There's a lot of money in that. There's not really a lot of money in helping the people. That's what I want people to really get from this. Let's go back in. There's another portion here. They once railed against liberal weakness and appeasement, but they swiftly migrated to the Democratic Party rather than support Donald Trump, who showed no desire to start a conflict with Russia and who called the invasion of Iraq a big, fat mistake. Besides, as they correctly pointed out, Hillary Clinton was a fellow neocon. And liberals wonder why nearly half the electorate who revile these arrogant, unelected power brokers as they should, voted for Trump. Let's say this one more time again, guys. This is important to note. They once railed against liberal weakness and appeasement, but they swiftly migrated to the Democratic Party rather than support Donald Trump, who showed no desire to start a conflict with Russia and who called the invasion of Iraq a big, fat mistake. Besides, as they correctly pointed out, Hillary Clinton was a fellow neocon. And liberals wonder why nearly half the electorate who reviled these arrogant, unelected power brokers as they should, voted for Trump. It really, really makes you think, you guys. It really makes you think when you look at it. Let me go back in. These ideologues did not see the corpses of their victims. I did, including children. Every dead body I stood over in Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Gaza, Iraq, Sudan, Yemen, or Kosovo, month after month, year after year, exposed their moral bankruptcy, their intellectual dishonesty, and their sick bloodlust. They did not serve in the military. Their children do not serve in the military, but they eagerly ship young American men and women off to fight and die for their self delusional dreams of empire and American hegemony. Or, as in Ukraine, they provide hundreds of millions of dollars in weaponry and logistical support to sustain long and bloody proxy wars. This portion here about the children, let me speak about this for a second. One of the excuses about the conflict in Afghanistan, I remember people were saying we can't leave Afghanistan because we have to help the women and the children. And they've used that line with just about every conflict I've experienced in my lifetime. We have to go there because we have to save the women and the children. And a lot of Americans believe that. You'd be surprised. But if you really are trying to save the women and the children, you wouldn't escalate any type of conflict there in the first place, because it's the women and the children who are just civilians there, who are just trying to live their everyday life, that are not fighting in these wars. They didn't sign up for this. They're the ones, the innocent people that are being killed. Innocent kids. One day, if you have not done so, I recommend sitting down and having a conversation with someone who has fought in these wars. Someone who fought in Iraq. Have a sit down discussion with them, because some of the things that they have seen and they have experienced may surprise you. It's horrific. My dad talks about some of these things with me today. He did not talk to me about it when I was younger, and I understand why. And then those same soldiers come back, the ones who do make it back to the United States, they come back here and they have PTSD. They've seen their friends killed. They have lost family members. They've seen children. Just, this does something to you as a person. They come back to the United States, and then now they're expecting to get some type of support from the United States government because they went abroad and they fought for their country. They only come back here only to find out just how screwed up the veteran affairs system is and how they treat veterans when they come back to this country. They realize that it's not that easy for them to get an appointment to see someone at the VA. They realize that it's not that easy to be put on disability, even though they may have a clear physical disability that happened in war. There's still all this paperwork and all these different appointments that they have to go through. And then some of them have to be treated for PTSD. It is only then, during that time, that they realize just how corrupt the system is in this country. And when I talk about the healthcare system, I'm talking about the VA as well. Because the VA has been known to drag their feet for a long time. It can take people months. It can take people years. It took my dad years to get 100% disability. Years. So you do all of this. You risk your life. You go abroad. You fight in these ridiculous, endless wars. You lose friends in the process who were there fighting with you. They don't get to come back home. You see kids being killed. You can't sleep at night because you hear bombs going off. So when you come back to the United States, you still can't sleep. This happens. And the country who sent you there, who told you to go fight for your country, when you come back to that country, you are disregarded. A lot of the homeless people that I see are veterans. There are people who fought in Vietnam, People who fought in Iraq, a lot of them are veterans. It's all connected. The military industrial complex, the healthcare system, the education system, all these systems that I talk about on this show, they're all connected. And they all go back to the class issue because the people at the top, they don't have to do this. The people at the top, they don't have to go fight abroad. A lot of people that do join the military do so to get out of poverty, to get out of the financial situation that they're in. And that sometimes includes student loans, because that's another way that they'll get you. Join the military. You only got to serve for like 5 to 6 years and we'll pay off all your student loans. So it's a corrupt system all around. There's one more point I want to mention in this article, and then I'm going to go to the next story. This is a really good article, by the way. There was one more part that I wanted to mention. This part right here. Just this line here. They believe violence magically solves all disputes. And I want to hear what you guys think about that. They believe violence magically solves all disputes. But it doesn't. There are some people who believe this. They believe that out of chaos will come peace. If that's the case, why do we still have all these endless wars that have been going on for years? Do you consider it peaceful that the people in those countries are now suffering because of the conflict that has happened there, because the U.S. intervened? Is that considered peace? I don't think so. I don't think so. But yes, some people believe that. They believe that out of all this chaos and destruction will come peace. Thanks for the super chat. None of your business. Where are the churches to stand against war? Well, they've been propagandized too. None of your business. I'm glad you brought that up. They've been propagandized too. A lot of times, and I can tell you, as someone who was, I grew up in the church. A lot of times when I would go to church on Sunday, they would actually repeat the same talking points that mainstream media would repeat. Believe it or not, the same talking points. Yes, our president has us over there right now, and we're fighting the good fight. We're doing what the good Lord told us to do. Go over there and fight the good fight. Pretty sure the Bible does not say you're just supposed to go out there and slaughter people. I don't know what book they're reading. Some of these preachers have also been propagandized as well. They just it's the same message. And this is another way that they get you. That's another way that they get you, especially the African-American community. If they don't get that propaganda from the news, from mainstream media, if they're not getting it from CNN, from MSNBC, from Fox News, say it's someone who doesn't have cable, say it's someone who just doesn't really watch TV. If they don't get it there, we'll get them in the church. We'll get the preacher to deliver that message. You'd be surprised.